Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We'll give a little more time for people to join. In the meantime, I thought I'd let you all out of that waiting room and maybe just see where everyone's calling in from. So if you can find the chat box and text in and tell me your location. Portugal, Nigeria, India. I am in Chicago. So again, if you can find the chat box, Washington State, Ireland, love it. Where else? Where is everyone calling from? Houston, Texas. Got a nice spread of countries, states, cities. So far, I don't think I've seen any two people in the same place. We've got a nice spread. Again, I'm going to give it just a couple more minutes. It's almost time to start, but we'll see if we have a few more people joining before we get started. Another Houston. Oh, I think that's 2 for Houston. Houston is winning. I think I saw 2 from Houston. Maybe not. Maybe there was just 1. All right. Where else are you calling from? Got a nice group on here today. Thank you all so much for joining. Ireland. Oh, I think Ireland is winning. 2 people from Ireland. Thank you for joining us in your evening. Fort Lauderdale, New Orleans. A lot of places that I would like to travel to sometime soon. All right. Well, we will get started in just a second. Thank you, Martha. Yes, thank you again all for joining. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Angela McDonald, and I am a career coach here with Udacity. And today we're going to be talking about those gaps in our resume. And when we have that gap and we dread maybe talking about it, thinking about how to address it. And today we're going to give you some tips, techniques, share ideas, and give you a little more confidence to be out there on the job search. So one thing I want to say too, I'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, about 15 minutes of questions at the end. But at any point in time, if you have a question, please type it in the chat box, and I will address questions as I go. At the end, we can also unmute and ask questions as well, or if you can't type in the chat and you want to unmute yourself for a second, that is absolutely fine. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. And I will keep everyone muted just so we can avoid the background noise. But in the meantime, feel free to use the chat box. I also have Rui on here from Udacity who can be helping me as well with addressing any issues or questions that come up. So again, we'll have about 45 minutes of content, me talking. I'd love for all of you, I'm going to be asking questions, getting your input. So please join in, type in the chat box. If you want to chat and just unmute yourself, that's okay too. So let's get started. So again, I'm a career coach with Udacity. I'm also a corporate trainer working in leadership development, communication skills, presentation skills, based in Chicago, but I've also lived and worked in America, Australia, China, and Singapore. I was overseas working and living for about 16 years, and I've been back in the States for a few years now. So as you can imagine, moving around those different places, it was because of my husband's job. So in my case, it was definitely, I had some gaps at different times that I had to overcome and work through. So I have a lot of experience myself in looking at a career gap and how I would address it and how we would make sense of it all to a future employer. And also, as a career coach, work with people every day who have had a gap and trying to figure out how to help them overcome it and feel confident with that gap in their career. You can all try to keep yourselves on mute. I will make sure we're all muted now. And Rui, if you wouldn't mind just hitting mute all if we hear some background noise, that would be great. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? First of all, building career confidence. And what I find in my experience is when someone's had a gap, the number one challenge for them is building up that confidence again, building the confidence to talk to someone about the gap, about maybe where they feel like that's a weakness in their current career, and how they can talk about it and feel confident going back into the workplace, especially if it's been a longer gap. We're going to talk about strategies to discuss your gap. And we're going to look at resume strategies a little bit for addressing the gap as well. And again, the do's and the don'ts of the gap discussion. So gaps happen. We all know that, right? We know that they're going to happen. They can be that you stayed home to care for children or family members. You took a sabbatical. You lost your job, medical leave. You took time off to study. Whatever the reason, it's okay to have a gap. A lot of people have it. You're not the only one. I know it can feel like that sometimes, or you're surrounded maybe by a lot of people not working, and you really know you want to go back to work, and it's hard to get yourself back in that professional mindset and feel the confidence to go back. So they happen, and we just have to find ways to tell our story and really be future focused. So I'd like to put a poll up here to ask you why you had a gap. And remember, gaps are okay. And it's really to help me as we're talking today to position a little bit of our discussion more specifically, if I know where some of you are coming from, what your reason is for your personal gap. So if you should see the poll up on the screen now. Why do you have a gap in your career history? And I meant to put an other category there and forgot. So if one of those doesn't fit you, I'm sorry about that. I know there are just other reasons as well. I try to think of the most common ones that I know of. Again, don't feel self-conscious about your gap. Hey, we're all on here because we've had a gap, we're in a gap, or maybe there's a gap in our future. So feel free to, one of the first things to be able to talk about is, what is that gap? Your names are not going to come up in this polling, so I'd love to get some feel. It looks like we've got a lot of people who have the gap because they wanted to concentrate on their studies. We have several of you who have stayed home with your children, and then we've got a spread of other people with maybe a family illness, lost your job, several of you. Again, remember, we all know that happens. So I'll let the poll stay up for just another minute. Not quite a minute. I'll give you a few more seconds in case you're not at your computer and maybe you're trying to look at, someone typed in, they took a intentional 1-year sabbatical. I hope you did something fabulous, Leah. I know a lot of times people take a sabbatical and they go through times in that sabbatical where they feel like it's the best thing and most amazing thing they've ever done, and it feels so good. And other times a little guilt sets in or a little bit of fear sets in. So I hope you were able to enjoy your 1 year, or maybe you're still in your 1 year and you're enjoying it. So I'll end the polling now. Like, we've got a lot of you there. I'll share the results so you can all see that you are not alone. So you can see here, staying home with children, caring for family, sabbaticals, concentrate on studies. Anita said that she couldn't see the gap, but because of work visa issues and then family responsibilities. So, okay. Florian, yes, I do know what it's like. So again, thank you all for joining in the poll. Someone said that there was downsizing and then studying and upgrading. Yes, sometimes a gap happens not by our own decision, but then we turn it into an opportunity. And it sounds like, Frederica mentioned he was downsized, but then now he's taken that time to study and upgrade some skills. So that's excellent. All right. So again, remember, whatever the reason, whatever that reason for your gap, you're not the only one. You're absolutely not I talk to people all the time who think, oh, I don't have those skills. Everybody else does. I haven't done this. And there's so many people taking time off to have a gap. And it's a great time in our history and in the world that we have the opportunity to go back to work. I was talking to someone recently who was a bit older and said they had to quit their job as soon as they found out they were pregnant. They just weren't allowed to keep working, and they weren't allowed to come back. So we don't live in those times anymore, fortunately. So that's the good news, right? So I'd like to get some thoughts out there about what concerns you the most about your gap. What is the specific fear or concern that you have? Is it that your technical skills aren't up to date, which I know many of you are working on in one way or another, because that's why we're here at Udacity? Or is it the perception that someone might have of you? Is it that you don't know how to talk about what you've been doing? So just give me a few ideas there. And I know everything I said of all of the above have all been something I've thought about. So just give me a few of your thoughts here on like what concerns you the most about your gap and talking about it. Someone says technical skills and ageism. Absolutely. Those are definite things that come up that we think about. Someone said the method of framing it is just putting it together, right, and talking about it. Interviewers always highlight it. That's right, no hi. That's the annoying part, isn't it? Someone said they didn't get tenure, so maybe you spent a lot of time in maybe a PhD university setting, but you didn't get tenure, so now you're taking the time to go do something else, and then you have to talk about it. And just kind of tying into, and I'll talk about this at the very end, but it's definitely next week we're going to talk about how to deal with your greatest weakness question. And for a lot of you, that greatest weakness might be the exact topic we're talking about today. So you get a little ahead of the game there. Matthew says it's the perception of maybe someone thinking you're lazy. Good comment. There are definitely some people who don't appreciate the gap that might think that. And quite honestly, maybe that's the first sign that you don't want to work for that person. And he says, my concern is that I still have family responsibilities of the kids, so my priority is for a part-time job. But if I put that constraint, I'm worried I won't be able to start again. Okay, and we'll talk a lot about that, Anita, today, and the opportunities that are out there, and some resources that you can find where certain companies and organizations are starting to embrace more part-time workers and flex time as well. Florian says, facing resistance from HR, rejected before being considered, basically afraid of being stopped at the gatekeeper. Good point. Very good point. Those are real. All of these are real things that I hope as you're all reading the comments as well, I'm thinking, yes, that's me too. Because I think that's the great thing about having us all on here today is we've all been there. What if technical skills, how to frame the gap? I'm seeing, what if you were unable to clear a few subjects and had to repeat a year? Okay, so maybe in your studies you had a little extra time there. That fear of just getting left behind, that's a good one too. And maybe if you think about having the gap or planning the gap and getting left behind. So thank you all for those thoughts. Again, I hope you're reading them and realizing again that all of us have very similar thoughts and feelings about it. And again, I think that's in the workplace today, people are a lot more open, but given that they're open, we still have to be very confident in our message, in our story, and our approach to talking about the gap. And that's why I think, and I noticed even myself as the course of moving around in different times and having gaps either with my kids or just because we had moved. And I noticed many years ago probably not soon enough, is that when people would ask me what I had been doing, I would maybe talk kind of around 8 different things, and I didn't have a really clear message. So I realized when I started looking for a job and started approaching people about working, whether it was just to start networking or actually interviewing, I had to have that story tied up. I had to have my pitch, my positioning of who I am and where I want to go, so that I felt confident in myself, and the people interviewing me felt confident, that felt and heard that confidence in me. So that's why we want to prepare. Yes, people are more open. Yes, people are going back to work after gaps, but we can't just show up and pretend it didn't happen and know how to talk about it. So number one thing is building that confidence. We want to build that career confidence. And there's really three areas that we can think about that can really help us with this. And one is we want to make sure we're relevant. We want to update our knowledge in the field that we're entering. Again, if you've taken a gap and you're going back, you want to make sure you've really become you're staying relevant. You might not have stayed relevant, and if you stayed home with your kids for 7 years, but there's ways to get back to being relevant. You want to start networking and feeling professionally connected with people where you want to work, or even people who inspire you maybe to go back to work. You want to show, again, that confidence, know your pitch and address that gap so you can start being future focused and not dwelling on that gap. So let's look at each one of these one at a time. So first is to be relevant. What can we do to be relevant? So let's imagine you've taken that year, that 3 years, that 5 years, that 8 years, whatever it is, and you're starting to think about going back to work. And many of you have obviously already had decided to take a Udacity class to help you be relevant, which is awesome. Other things to do is start following industry blogs. Make sure you're up to date on, and I think, maybe myself, I was in banking for many years and early in my career. If I was going to go back into banking, I would start following on LinkedIn or in the Wall Street Journal, and making sure I'm reading the news and following people's blogs and following websites. So I know what's the terminology out there. What are people talking about? What are the hot topics? Follow top companies on LinkedIn. Follow the influencers on LinkedIn. Educate yourself on new office technology. One thing that I think that I hear a lot is people will say, well, I don't know how to do that, or I'm not sure about that. And some of the things are so simple that you can easily research it and talk to people before you go back and start working in that environment. So I don't know, maybe if we imagine someone who maybe their gap was at the time we went from fax machines to email, and they were going back to work and said, well, I don't know how to use email. Figure it out before you go interview. Figure out if they're using Slack, or if they're using a technology. And I think all of you, this particular audience, I think where you have definitely a leg up on people in other industries is that you are obviously technically savvy and you're upgrading your skills already with Udacity. So I think that being relevant from a technical standpoint, you should be in typically pretty good shape. I know that there are certain technical skills you wish were stronger, you wish you had more experience in, but that will come. You're not completely non-relevant. But again, staying up to date, if you're programming in a language that maybe is not as prevalent today as it was when you were working, I know a lot of you are doing is upgrading those programming skills. So one is kind of the technical side of being relevant, but also just the industry, what people are talking about. And when you think about those influencers, there's, playing around with LinkedIn and figuring out how to be reading the right posts and following the right people. One of the things to do is find someone who does the job you want. So let's say I want to be a digital marketer, and I've been taking classes, and I know I want to be a digital marketing manager. I'm going to go and look at other people's profiles and see what groups are they in, who do they follow, what companies do they follow, who have they worked for, and then I'm going to start kind of trolling around and looking at those companies and those groups and see which ones I might want to join. In my case, when I moved from Singapore back to America, I knew that I wanted to stay in corporate training and career coaching. So I started finding people who were trainers and coaches in America, in Chicago area, looking at the companies they work for, who they've contracted with, which groups they're in, who they follow. And I started joining groups and listening to conversations. And, in the beginning, you might be a bit of just the voyeur, right? You're just kind of reading and looking and seeing what people are doing. And then gradually you might start liking some of their posts, or then you might start commenting on some of their posts. And you'll find as you start educating yourself in the industry news and the company news, you start feeling much more relevant pretty quickly. And as you go out to interview, and network, you'll feel like you can be a part of the conversation. And that's, it's something that's not that hard to do, but I can't believe how many people will tell me they've, gone back to take these finance classes and they want to go work for a bank. And I'll say, okay, who do you think are your top 5 banks you'd like to work for? And they haven't really even looked into any of them. So get to know your field, get to know the companies. If we see the drone on there, if you're want to work in AI for a company that is making the technology in drones, then know those top drone companies. Find out who the big players are, who's blogging about it, who's talking about it. Get in the conversation. And remember, you can be the fly on the wall for a while. That's the great thing about like the social media. You can join one of these groups that has 3,000 people in it and just be the fly on the wall that's listening and reading, and not really, you don't have to participate immediately until you feel you've built up that confidence. Any questions on this slide and being relevant and some of the things I mentioned? Just pause here for a second. And if you have any specific questions, I can address those now. Give you a few seconds to type your message if that's what anyone is doing, or if you need to unmute yourself and just ask a quick question, that's okay too. All right. So obviously it kind of goes without saying, as you see on here, several of these items connect into LinkedIn. So obviously having a really strong LinkedIn profile is important as well. And we have done some webinars on those, and we have a career project with LinkedIn, and as coaches, we also help you with your LinkedIn profile. Okay, the next one was network. And again, we've done other webinars on networking, and we could spend an hour just talking about networking, but I wanted to just touch on it quickly here to think about. Remember that first step, we want to be relevant. We want to make sure we're updated. You want to just start networking and you haven't done a little of your research and feeling like you're starting to gain a little bit of that relevancy through reading and talking maybe to closer friends, closer classmates that you might have had. Then once you feel like you've feel a little more relevant, you've had some conversations with the people tighter in your circle, then it's time to branch out and network. Because as you think about going into this next position, you want to start talking to people. And it may not be, and it shouldn't be in the very beginning, hey, I need a job, but reconnecting, saying, you know what, I was, got my PhD in medicine, but I've decided to kind of take a data analytics approach to things and took some time off to take these classes. I'd love to hear what you're doing now. Having conversations, finding out what other people are doing, letting them know what you're doing. So that you start, again, you're gaining all that knowledge. It helps you become more relevant. You start exploring the options that are out there. Again, part of that is the online groups and discussions. As you're the fly on the wall for a while, then you want to start engaging. And you might look for meetup events, Eventbrite, or alumni events. One of the questions that came up is a lot of companies want 2 to 5 years experience, even though they say graduate roles. How do you fill this gap as a graduate? I think that sometimes especially when I hear that 2 to 5 years of experience, depending on the position, a lot of times they're just looking for someone with some work experience. So if you have other work experience and you've proven yourself, and technically you can overcome that. I think once they're asking for someone with over 5 years, that starts looking at, maybe they need management experience. Maybe they need much higher level technical experience and working with something for enough time. So I think under 5 years, it's kind of annoying when they say it's a graduate role, but yet they want 3 years of experience. So it's a little funny that way. Not quite Not quite right, is it? So I say, and while we're on that, one thing to try not to get too caught up on is every detail in the job description. Um, a lot of skills transfer over from your different experiences. And remember, job descriptions were put together as like, oh, this would be the best case scenario, but they're not going to get every box ticked on there. And when you're looking at job descriptions, don't get caught up in every bullet point, every detail. If you read the job description and you think, you know what, I can do this. That's number one. Number two is, do I meet most of the requirements and uh, skills that they're looking for? Most, I say around 75%. And if those two things are good, then that's kind of like it's met the cut, apply. Let them take the time to decide if they want to interview you or not. I know you should be applying for obviously a lot of jobs. So if you spent the time with every little detail, it can really slow you down. Next is this preparation and really being prepared to address the gap. And again, we want to prepare it just as much as we prepare an elevator pitch. It's similar. We want to prepare a lot of our answers for interviews and think about what we want to say. And addressing the gap is one of the biggest. And again, we want to show that we believe in ourselves so that others can believe in us too. We want to show the confidence in ourselves so they have confidence as well. And you really need a strategy to discuss the gap. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Ramya says most of the returnship opportunities in companies have a minimum experience required is 5 years. Yeah, I have noticed that returnships are definitely right now targeting people who may have had like quite a bit of a career. And then I think from what I see, most of it's like I had a career, I stayed home with my kids for quite a long time, and now I'm going back. Tends to be where those returnships are focused. And I'll give you some resources at the very end where you can look for some other opportunities besides just a returnship. So this is the strategy that I think is very effective for answering the question, why do you have a gap in your career? Or however they ask it. They might say, well, what did you do for the last 5 years? Or what can you tell me a little bit about your background? I noticed you've taken some time off. However they ask it, this strategy can help you just get a very concise answer and proceed into that interview with confidence and get past that first screening question. So first thing you want to do is the 3 steps: state it, fill it, close it. Sounds simple when you just make it 3 little steps, right? We're going to go into each one in more detail. So state the gap. Why were you unemployed? Simple enough, very quick, very simple. Don't tell them the big life story of whatever you did. If it was your sabbatical, you don't need to say, talk about the year in Bali or wherever it was. Or if it was, you just say it quickly. Don't go into the details of what you did daily or that you were, volunteering at your kid's school and talk about all the different events you did. Just really quickly, why were you unemployed? Then the fill the gap is what did you do during the gap? And this is where, and we'll go into a little more detail, you just highlight some of the things that are most relevant to maybe the job that you're looking at. But most importantly, and where you want to spend most of your time is that 3rd step, closing the gap. What do you want to do next? And basically closing the gap is saying, forget about this. This is what I'm going to do now. This is where my future is. This is where I want to go and grow. So let's look at each of those in detail. State it. How should you state it? You should be honest, direct, and concise. Again, you don't need to go into, well, I kind of decided to do this and I wasn't sure. And then I decided maybe this, and just very quickly, I decided that I wasn't growing in my previous role. I took a couple years off to study and expand my skills. Boom. That's all you have to say. Okay. What did you do during the gap? And think about, even if some of the things you did were in the last 2 months of the gap, right? Maybe you spent 5 years home with your kids and you were just entrenched in diapers and preschool. That's okay. But maybe in the last 6 months, you've started ramping up and doing something. You've done some freelancing. You've worked on projects. You've attended events, or you've planned events, different meetings and workshops. Maybe you did some writing. Maybe you were blogging. What continuing education did you do? Did you take some classes along the way? Or maybe you just ramped up right at the end. Maybe you had some community involvement, some volunteer work, some mentoring. And again, like, fill it with the most important, pick and choose what you might tell them, because you don't want to stay on this too long. You want to highlight a few things that are relevant to the professional work you might be doing. And if you don't feel like you have anything super specifically relevant, then just highlight real quick. I was involved a lot with my children's school and a charity in the city that feeds hungry children, whatever it is, and then move on. If you did a lot of different things, if you like, you can talk a little bit about freelancing and projects, then maybe you'll spend a little more time on this. But again, we don't want to go too long, because we really want to focus on step 3. What do you want to do now? And this is where you need to show your excitement about relaunching your career. You want to show your commitment, and you want to be clear about the job you want. So if we think about this, a lot of times I know that when people are deciding to go back to work, there is that time where they're going, I think I want to do it. Oh, but I'm kind of feeling still maybe pulled by family in this direction. But I know this is what I want. And you go back and forth, and that's completely normal. But when you're in the interview, all that waffling has to go away, and you have to say, I am so excited to go back to work. I'm ready to go back and dive in full time. And I'm really wanting to be, a Python programmer, and I've been spending the last 6 months upgrading these skills, blah, 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 blah. This is where you want to be very future focused and spend your time and show that excitement and commitment. So I'm going to just pop back to that slide that showed the 3 steps and ask if you have any questions about state it, fill it, close it. I know it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to think about how you're going to position it. It's a good thing to talk about with a career coach if you have the opportunity. Get some ideas down, write it down, practice it. Don't necessarily memorize it, but feel like you've packaged up your message. I often tell people sometimes we have to imagine in an interview when someone asks us this question or tell us about yourself, I want you to imagine you're handing them a present. You need to tie up your story with a pretty bow and hand it to them on a silver platter. Because if you waffle, if you're unsure, if you go around in circles, if you're not very clear, your confidence will go down, and you've lost the opportunity. So state it, fill it, close it. Any questions on those 3 steps? Again, at this time, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that's absolutely fine. Or if you would like to type something, I've got a nice long one here. Let me take a look. I was unemployed because of the work visa issue at first, and then because of family, but I invested my time in acquiring new skills and learned programming and data analysis tools like blah, 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 blah. I enjoyed working on different supervised learning projects in different domains. Now I'm so excited to be a data analyst and work on real life business scenarios. Anita, that's awesome. You just stated it, filled it, and closed it perfectly. I love how that first sentence, very concise, very to the point. It's really no one's, I mean, they really don't have to know why you ever took time off, but it is easier and better, and it shows a lot more transparency and honesty when you do just say it, and even if it's personal issues. But I think sometimes if you can say the reason, and most people can, there are some like much more personal issues that maybe you don't want to, and you just say personal issues, I think sometimes that could make someone wonder, and their imagination could wonder things you don't want them to wonder. So the more honest you can be and direct and quick, I think is better. And yes, Anita, you addressed all 3 points. Very good. And that, one of the key things, and like someone said earlier, is that sometimes, in the interview process, someone it's like they get stuck on that gap. And that's where if you have this nice tight, again, Anita packaged it all up for them and handed it to them with a bow around it. Now all they should be talking about is the future and her in this position. They shouldn't keep addressing the gap. She's addressed it, move on. Okay, if you think of other questions or you want to write yours out, feel free and I will comment. Otherwise, I will go ahead and move on. Just check our timing. Still doing good. I know one of the things that comes up is, and I've done a lot of research on this topic, and people talk about like what benefits you gained by having a gap. And think about, and this is like kind of when you think about that step where you fill it and think about the benefits you gained by having a gap. What did you learn? What did you experience? Like in my case, I guess I think about a couple of my gaps when I moved to other countries. I had the opportunity to focus on learning some of the language, exploring a new culture, and kind of settling in and having that time to really have that travel experience and language learning experience. And I could talk maybe a little bit about that benefit in a very quick way. Sometimes they'll ask you, how do you think you benefited from this gap? So any thoughts there? Does anyone want to comment on what they think they benefited the most? When you think right now, if you're at I'm assuming everyone here is had a gap or in a gap. I guess I should have asked that at the beginning as well. We'll assume it for now. It looks like from the conversation, most of you have. When you think back to a certain gap you've had, what are you so grateful that you learned from it? Now, it might be that you learned, if you took, it might not be something that you learned taking a class, but it might be something that you learned by volunteering. Anyone want to comment on something that they might think about? Oh, it looks like I am muted. 1 second. Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Sorry if you missed something. It looks like I was muted for a second. So anyone think of anything that they feel like they might have, they're so grateful for that they took the time to learn or understand while they were off? I know for me, part of it when I moved to China was learning Mandarin. Please don't ask me to speak it right now. I should have learned more than I did, but I did get some exposure and feel happy about it. I know that some people have taken time off maybe to care for family in another country, and being able to have that time with family and learn, and they balanced a lot of things, but it also made them realize how much they do love having their own professional life. Someone said learning and being able to recover from the gap. Absolutely. When you've lost your job, when you've been made redundant, when something's happened with your company, that as much as you don't want to experience a lot of what you experienced, it really does teach you to be maybe a little more creative and find new ways to do something. Florian said, for me, it's simply the way forward is much clearer. I had to tackle some personal issues as well, so my mind is much more free to get to this next step. That's great. I think I see that as well. I think that sometimes when we take a break from work, and especially if we've worked in one field for a long time, we can kind of see like, you know what I realized is I really like this part of what I did, but not this, or I really liked working for this type of company, but not that type. So a lot of those things start to clarify. We invest time to learn skills. Very good. I will back up to one question. Someone said, how do we look for influencers on LinkedIn? The way I like to do it is, again, so when I moved back to Chicago, just to use my example, since I kind of know it firsthand, I found people who were corporate trainers. I just Googled corporate trainers, career coaches, whatever it was, found who they worked for, then clicked on those companies, looked at then some of the people that worked for them, and then looked at who those people were following, and then maybe try to find the president or the CEO and see who they might follow, or actually follow them, and see, and just kind of, do some digging, a little detective work that way. And if you know anyone that's pretty active on LinkedIn or social media that you can say, in digital marketing, who do you like to follow? What news do you like to keep up with? I know I found some great blogs for data analysts that I'm not a data analyst, but that I found for other people that I think are really great. And they'll often quote quote people who have written something, or publish in their blog something that someone else has written. And so you can find the names that way. So I think, so first step, obviously we want to go through that 3-step process and prepare this discussion about the gap. But there's always going to be that person that wants to know more. What did you do? What benefits did you gain? And you might have to expand a little more because they've asked you about it. So what are some of the ideas that we have about the benefits that we gained? And you all have already mentioned a few of these. Is you had time to reflect on the past and future goals. You had a little more clarity, a little more sure of what you want. You were able to have the time to dedicate to learning new skills, and sometimes that renewed energy in your career. And and think about, like, everyone's got some, a lot of people do volunteer work when they take time off, and finding that they were able to give some of their time, which is very rewarding and something you don't have enough time to do when you're working full time. Martha said, a lot of clarity in knowing the direction I want to go in. What's the field of tech I'm happy to go into and advance in. Also, the location choices I choose to live in are now more clear. I upskilled and have a better opportunity to work in an area and location that I like. That's great. Those are all great ways to again, it shows your confidence, and it shows that sureness in yourself and what you want. We'll talk about resume for a little bit. In general, obviously there will be a gap somewhere. And a few of the ways you can help, and I think more so, again, we're not hiding the gap. We're not trying to say something happened that didn't, but we want to be more future focused, and we want to highlight the most relevant information. So first, we want to lead. Again, this is where you all are very fortunate, having the technical skills that you do and taking the Udacity courses and knowing you're already upgrading here. So leading your resume with technical skills and core competencies. And you might have heard of the term functional resume or chronological resume. Chronological resume is very traditional, where you would kind of go in order of time, and then it always starts with the education and then the work experience. And that's really, that traditional way isn't super common, especially in tech. Because if we think, what do they want to know first? What's the most important information? It's going to be those technical skills and core competencies. So I really encourage people to, in the order of their resume, and this is really people in tech in general, and especially people with a gap, because it draws attention to what's most important, not the gap. So if we look at, if we look at, you've got your contact details up top, then having a strong professional objective that states a little bit about who you are, what you're looking for, leading in with those technical skills and core competencies, and highlight some newly developed skills. Maybe you go straight into projects at that point to show the relevant work you've been doing. Maybe you did a little freelance work. Also, I think one thing that is a lot of people in tech I've noticed overlook is some of the freelance or project work that they did while they were out of work that is actually pretty valuable. So if you were asked by a neighbor to do something for their business, if you were asked by the school board to do something to their website, or do some data analytics for them, think about those as like putting on your resume that maybe you were, freelance in a certain field, or had your own kind of volunteer independent contractor. So if you've done enough projects to justify that, then definitely include that on your resume. That you don't have to have a formal business license to say you were an independent contractor on your resume. But you want to have real projects that you've done so you can talk about them. You don't want to, just to make sure I'm totally clear there, you don't want to call yourself an independent contractor if you didn't actually do anything. You want to make sure, hey, I was an independent contractor for the last 3 years. How many projects did I do? Write them down, make sure you can talk about them. So those are some general tips on resume. Remember, you're not hiding the gap, you're just raising to the top the most important information that they need to see. Any questions on resume? All right, we're going to talk about a few do's and don'ts, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So we talked about some of these, but just to make sure we've got them all on here. These are things you do want to do. You want to obviously address the gap. You don't want to try to hide it. You don't want to try to pretend it didn't happen. You want to be very clear with your goals. Remember, it's okay to feel unsure. It's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel like you've got one foot in with your family and one foot at work mind, and you're not sure some days. But when you go in there to interview, you want to make sure it's absolutely, yes, I want to work. And, you know, if things change, that's okay. But right then, you need to be confident and sure of yourself and articulate your message with confidence. You want to be future focused and really have that growth mindset. And I'm going to show you a slide here in a minute about really focusing on that growth mindset. And be sure you want to work. Be sure that you've really thought through the process. If you've taken a long time, especially, and you're not, you know, again, be sure you want it, but don't feel bad when you have those thoughts that you think, oh, I should really be still taking care of my parents, or I should be home with my kids, or what if I should be doing this? You can find a way to balance it, and you're not going to know if you can do it until you get out there and start trying. And then find a support network. Find people you can talk to, maybe other people who are looking for jobs, friends, colleagues, ex-colleagues that you talk to, that you can get that support network. And ask for help. Ask people for conversations. Ask people to look at your resume. You know, reach out to some of those professional contacts that you have, or good friends that also might be working in other area of business, and don't be afraid to ask for help. So here we want to just take a quick look at that growth mindset. And if you read some of that information in there, failure is an opportunity to grow. You know, that's kind of a, you know, when I think about a gap is an opportunity to grow. It wasn't a failure, but it was a gap. The belief that you can learn to do anything you want, that challenges help you grow, that your effort and attitude determine your abilities, not what someone else thinks they should be, that feedback is constructive, that you're inspired by the success of others, and you like to try new things. And another thing with that growth mindset is, you know, I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'll never be able to go back to work. I've been out too long. Or, oh, no one's going to want to hire me because I took this break. That thinking has to go way, 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 way out the window. And read, if you're feeling stuck, read this growth mindset. Keep that growth mindset. And there's a great book on the growth mindset that I cannot think of the title and author at this moment, but maybe before we finish. But Google growth mindset and books and you'll find it. This fixed mindset is that I'm either good at it or I'm not. I had a gap, I can do it or I can't. I can't control my destiny. We don't want to have this fixed mindset. We want to make sure we're really focused on that growth mindset. I'm going to answer Martha's question here, resume and in general question. If you have a gap in lacking a visa to work in, example, New York City, how would you approach getting work in New York City? If you were coming from Ireland, as you traveled a lot, Angela, you might be able to offer some advice and place of support in filling the gap in the visa challenge. Yes, the visa is a big challenge. I would say in tech specifically, it's a little easier, but it will take, I think the most important thing to get there is to start reaching out to people, start making connections in the area you want to go. So let's say it's New York City. And you could start finding people in a similar field, ask them to have a conversation. Maybe you find someone who went to your same university and they're in New York, and you could ask them, hey, do you have time to chat? Start building some relationships, people you know. There are some executive recruiters, if you're at a high enough level, that you can reach out to, and they will help with the visa process. Typically that's at much higher level positions. In the lower middle positions, that's not as likely. Again, I think building the relationships, trying to talk to recruiters, people in HR, people in the field, and see if you can get some momentum there. That's one of the best ways to start with that. What do we don't want to do? We don't want to dodge the question of the gap, right? We need to address it. We talked about the 3-step process. We're going to be ready for that. We don't want to dwell on the gap. We don't want to be like, oh, you know what? I took 5 years off and now I don't know if I can do that, but I'm really going to try. And, maybe I shouldn't have done it. Like, forget all that language that's not confident, and you're dwelling on it, and you can kind of go into a spiral. And don't let the gap hold you back. Don't let the fear of talking about it or the fear of getting back to work be the thing that holds you back. And also, I didn't put this on there, but something I think about too is a lot of people I help with, I say, that first foot back in the door is really all you need. That first opportunity, and it might take a while to find it, but once you get that first work experience in, it probably won't be your dream job. It probably won't be where you even think you should be based on what you've already done in your career, but get in there, prove yourself, work hard. They'll see it. You'll make sure you're doing all the right things to hopefully move up as soon as you can. And if they don't see it, well, then you've got great experience on your resume and it's time to move on. So know that first step in may not be the most ideal or dream position that you're looking for. And don't discuss it with uncertainty, right? You can talk to your friends over a drink if you want to talk about, like, oh my gosh, I'm nervous about going back. Don't talk about that to the interviewer, okay? Talk to your coach, talk to your friends, talk to your spouse, your family members about that nervousness, about that uncertainty, because that's normal, but don't have it in the interview. And don't show those insecurities about going back and having that gap. These are some resources that I've found, and I will say these are mostly US based that I'm aware of. However, they are pretty big organizations, a lot of them, so they might be something that can help you. A lot of them are female focused, so that's something to keep in mind. Sorry guys, there's not as much of a maybe network or camaraderie of this type of thing for men, but I think that some of these could also help you as well. If anything, even the blogs and the posts that they put out there, kind of walk through each one. And I don't know a ton about all of them, but I know enough of people that I've read through their websites and a little familiar with them. The Mom Project and the Appraise Group are very similar, where they are basically recruiters, and they partner with companies and have job listings that you can apply for, and they're positions that are open to someone who's had a gap, essentially. And the Mom Project is free from what I can still see. The Appraise Group is a fee involved. iRelaunch and Career Contessa are both have job listings, and they also have a lot of great articles. Lean In, you might know from Sheryl Sandberg. She wrote a book. She has a great site. They have Lean In groups around. If you're looking for other people to build that professional network, this would be a great place to look. I believe Appraise Group also has, the bottom one, Elevate Network, also has groups. I think Elevate, there's more of a fee involved from the last time I saw. Pathforward.org is, I don't know that one as well, but I did find it and thought it looked resourceful. So take a screenshot, how about that, and explore all of those. and see what you can find. The slide deck will be available. Actually, this will all go out on YouTube, and you'll get an email letting you know when it comes. So those are the resources that I found to date that I like. If you know of any more, please feel free to type it in now. I would love to know them. I'm sure everyone else would. I think that again, someone mentioned earlier the returnships, and I think there is a website that I think it might be iRelaunch, shows those a lot of different returnships that are out there. And if you're not familiar with the term returnship, it's basically an internship for older people who have worked, taken time off, and they want to go back to work. And it is a set time. It might be a 6-month type of job, and it's usually rotations in most cases that I've seen, where you can go back, rotate around in an area that interests you, and then after the 6 months and rotating to 3 or 4 divisions, figure out the spot that's best for you. Looks like a couple people want the data analyst resources I mentioned. I will, if you could message me on Slack or in the Student Hub, then I can send that to you. That's going to be the best way for me to get you. If you want any additional information that I might have mentioned that wasn't in the slide deck, please email me directly, or not email, Slack or Student Hub, message me and I'll get it to you. Martha said, women in tech, LGBTQ have some specific groups for networking. You can just Google tech in whatever area you're in. I know some people network via teaching, volunteering, and youth coding and mentoring groups. That's a great idea. I think that anytime and you're in a certain area, if you're a woman and you look for women in tech, or if you've got a specific volunteermatch.org has where you can find places to volunteer in your area that are in your area of interest. So yeah, Googling and searching for some volunteer work and some groups like that are great. Someone asked me what my Slack ID is. That's a good question. I don't know, Rui, if you can see it and type it in. I think it's Angela Career Coach or Career Coach Angela, something like that. Sorry, I forget. If you're in the careers channel, if you are on Slack and are in the careers channel, you should be able to find me pretty easily. But maybe if Rui from Udacity is on and could type that out, that would be great. An enthusiast group like drone flying may be a way to build friendships for men as well, and hackathons online. Those are all great. Those are kind of those great ways to think about networking. And there should be, when you get we keep most of our webinars on YouTube, and there is one all about networking, and a lot of these similar ideas are out there on how to get out and get involved. So that's great. Thank you so much for those, Martha. Okay, IBM coders have competitions. Wonderful. All right, I know we are getting to the end of our time. I want to let you know about our next workshop, and then I'm going to be on for about another 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So our next one I'm excited about too. It's an interview workshop. If you haven't attended an interview workshop, it is one of the coaches runs it. We only talk for maybe 10, 15 minutes at the most. And then the remaining time is practice interviewing, practice questions with a group of other Udacity students in breakout rooms through Zoom. So it's not it's not as maybe information heavy sharing as this career webinar here. So the interview workshop is up on the slide now. It is July 10th. And thank you, Rui, put the event details in so you can click on that. Again, please plan on coming and participating. I know some people come and then they just sit and listen, and that kind of makes it hard for the other people who are having the confidence and taking some risk out there to practice, and they're really helpful. Peter asked the link to the Slack group. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't. If you're on the Student Hub, you can send me a message there. I know some people are on Student Hub, some people are on Slack. It really depends on which nano degree you're in. Oh, thank you, Rui. She typed in where to get help with the request. All right, so that is the end of my content, and would love to throw it out there for questions. I know some people are asking about the career channel. If you can email, you see down at the bottom of my screen, career-support@udacity.com, or you can just, for Slack and those things, you could just type in support@udacity.com and they can help you get on the Student Hub career channel or the Slack channel, whichever you might be a part of. I think the majority of, if your Nano degree has started recently, most of it is all going to Student Hub, but there's still a lot of us on Slack as well. I'm in both. You can find me in either place. So questions about this content, questions about preparing for your career. What questions might you have? And again, as
Hello.
yes, go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to know now, how do we compete with all the fresh graduates and all the people who have had so many years of experience in the industry? Because now we have had a gap and we are learning new skills. How do we compete with them? Because they will always get preference.
You know, I think that, well, the first thing you're probably doing is upskilling through Udacity. I think getting a lot of, doing as many projects as you can to make sure, you know, if it's Python, that was the one skill you felt like you really needed to upskill in. So not only taking the class, but doing some open source projects, doing some competitions, doing some, even the practice so you can get through those interviews where you might have a coding challenge. And so that would really be the first step. And then to really think about all your other strengths, the strengths you have and the experience that, think about the different work experience you have had and what you can pull from those different experiences. Because remember, there's always so many transferable skills that we get in every position that we want to make sure we think about those and talk about those to show that, you know, hey, I might not have been, you know, sitting at my desk coding every day for the last 2 years, but I have done all of these projects and I've managed teams and I've led projects and I've, you know, whatever else you might have done in your career that can be really great transferable skills.
Okay, I'll try that. And
Yeah.
now another question, please.
Yep.
Does Udacity have those kind of technical platforms where we have coding challenges?
I am not aware of any specifically that Udacity has, but I know there's a lot of resources, and I know I've shared those in different forums, especially with Python. So if you message me later, I could send you some of those links, and if I have, and I'll help you find the ones specifically that you're looking for. HackerRank, I know, is one of the big ones that a lot of people do like. Oh, Fayed says the algorithms.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. One of the comments was just that the data structure and algorithm nano degree has those. I'm not sure if he's talking about challenges or if he's talking about, Fayed, can you tell us, are you talking about a channel or are you talking about challenges? Challenges, okay. Yes, and I have heard the data structure and algorithms nano degree is a newer one. And I've heard a lot of people who are going back to work taking that because it will help a lot in the interview process as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Can you please advise, oh, let me jump up here. Oh, I think that just got answered. I think, Martha, your question got answered by, you know, there's a lot of questions about Student Hub and Slack. So Rui's typing some information in there. Okay, she also, in the chat, you'll see that Rui put some interviewing resources for coding practice, the link there that is on our site. So that's great. Thank you, Rui. Is there a way to add myself to the email? Yes, I would email career-support@udacity.com. I do have another meeting coming up in just a couple minutes, so I do have to kind of keep us to our time, and I know all of you are busy. Thank you so much for all of you for attending. I hope that it helped you feel like you know how to address the gap, go in with a little more confidence, start positioning yourself in a way that you can go in and say, hey, I'm ready to work. And these are all the great things about me. And use these tools. This webinar was recorded. Even me talking in the camera the whole time, which is not as much fun for me, but I'm glad you all chimed in. I loved having the chat on here. It was fantastic. He said, let the dog out. Yes, I think my dogs are ready for a little attention as well. Hopefully I can do that for a minute between meetings. Thank you. Sorry about the doggies in the background. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Good luck with your career. And I hope to be talking to you all again soon or seeing you in the next workshop.
Thanks. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.